Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. It is really, truly a joy to be celebrating this magical moment with all of you. I see so many people here today that extend so far back into the genesis of GPA, and it is just a privilege to have you all here. So thank you very much. I want to tell you a story. In 2016, I was with my wife, Andrea, in Mexico, and we traveled to a southern mountainous village in Chiapas to do a day-long newborn resuscitation workshop. We got up early, rode in the truck for hours, beautiful green pastures, beautiful steep corn-terraced mountainsides. We got to this small town where there were 40 indigenous midwives waiting for us to do a refresher course in newborn resuscitation. Now, they had had newborn resuscitation already about 2 months beforehand, but as many of you here know, it's important to repeat these courses. They were very eager, they were very knowledgeable, they enthusiastically would dry off the baby on the little plastic dolls. They enthusiastically gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as part of their practice, and it was great. But all day long during this conference, one of these 40 midwives sat very close to me, and she had a 2-year-old child fastened to her back by this colorful blanket wrapped around her body, and she stared at me. She just stared at me. She just made piercing eye contact with those deep, dark irises of hers. She knew that I didn't speak Mayan dialects, and she didn't speak Spanish. And she held me. It was awkward. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know if something happened, if it was good, if it was bad. I don't know. And at the end of the conference, at the end of the workshop, she walked over to me, and she grabbed my wrist, and she held it really tight. Just this short woman of about 5 feet. And she vigorously motioned over Juan Carlos to come over at that moment. And she wanted Juan Carlos, who works with us, to translate from her Mayan dialect into Spanish. She wanted to tell me a story, she said. And it was very important to her that I had heard that story directly from her in that moment. And as she began to talk and tell the story, she didn't look at Juan Carlos, she looked at me. And she held that eye contact. It was very powerful. That's the only way we could talk to each other. The story begins 2 weeks after the first newborn resuscitation conference that GPA had sponsored, and she had attended. She was a midwife. There was a knock on the door of her hut at 3 a.m. She barely would have heard the knock had it not been for a delay in the pounding rainstorm that night. The cacophony of rain that was pelting her corrugated aluminum roof. The visitor at her door was the sister of Maria's patient, who lived in an adjacent village and was in active labor at that moment. She woke up Maria. Maria put on her long black rubber boots and grabbed her GPA midwife kit that had alcohol and scissors and umbilical tie. And then she grabbed her herbs that she uses to make a tea to facilitate uterine contraction. And then she pulled her green dark poncho over her head and headed out of her hut. As the two women started to hike down the mountain, the rain kicked up again. It was pounding rain, as she described. The trail was slippery and muddy with big rocks that they navigated. Several hundred feet below, the trail flattened, it crossed a stream, and they started to climb again. They climbed another 300, 400, 500 feet. When they arrived at the village, they were sweaty and rain-soaked. They went to the patient's hut, and they ducked under the door, and they went inside. It was quiet in the hut. The mud floor was dry. There were 2 young children sleeping on a straw mat on the floor. Aluminum cooking pans were stacked neatly in the corner. Ornaments decorated the inside of the walls. The mother laid on the big bed, quietly moaning. Her belly was glistening from an ointment that her husband had applied earlier that evening. A wood fire was crackling right next to the mother's bed, gently lighting the hut and warming it as well. Maria placed 3 clean towels next to the fire, and a 4th towel on a rickety table next to the mother's bed. She then went to the mother and massaged her shoulder and said a few gentle words in the mother's ear, and then went to the foot of the bed and sat down. She inspected the mother's vagina, and to her surprise, the baby's head was crowning, was about to be born. The mother had another strong contraction and let out an audible moan. And virtually before Maria was ready, there was abrupt and precipitous birth. The baby came shooting out the vagina, almost slid out of Maria's hands. She looked at the baby, and she noticed that he wasn't crying. And he was blue, and he was limp. Maria then told me that she never had the skills to intervene for newborn primary apnea in the past. The infant mortality rate in the state of Chiapas is 5 to 6 times that of the national Mexican infant mortality rate. Many babies in Maria's midwifery career had simply died. It just simply is how it was. But she said she remembered. She remembered the GPA conference a few weeks ago. She grabbed that warm towel and she vigorously dried off the baby, stimulating him. She threw the wet towel onto the ground and grabbed another warm towel and continued to dry the baby. More drama. She looked at the baby and she realized the baby still was apneic, was not crying, was blue and was limp. With one hand, she grabbed my wrist even stronger, and with the other hand and her index finger, she circled her lips as she described that she made a seal with her own lips around the baby's nose and mouth. Because she remembered what she had learned at the GPA conference 2 weeks ago. She blew into the baby's mouth, but she didn't see the chest rise. She repositioned the head a little further back, and she blew in again, this time a little harder, and the chest rose. And she blew a second time. She'd never done this before. And the chest rose again. And she blew a third time, and the chest rose again. And one more time she blew as hard as she could, and the chest rose, and the baby coughed and sputtered and began to cry, a robust cry, a scream, she said, and his lips turned pink, and his whole body began to move and kick. She delivered the placenta. She cut the umbilical cord, and she wrapped the baby in a blanket, and the baby then was at Mama's breast with a fierce sigh. She was watching my reaction the whole time. She wasn't looking at Juan Carlos. She had my wrist. And I had an emotional reaction. And she reached up with her muscular forearms, and she stepped close to me, and she wrapped them around my neck, and she hugged me tight. Indigenous women don't go near a North American white man. It's anti-cultural. And I hugged her back and I squeezed her. And you know what? She squeezed me even tighter and she started trembling. And I squeezed her tighter because I felt it and I meant it. And I started trembling. And we held that for seconds. And then we let go, and she took a step back, and she went back to that eye contact. And she put her palms together, and she subtly nodded her chin, and she gently smiled, and she sat down. You know, midwives in Chiapas and in Guatemala, they tell us these stories of births that they now attend and clinical situations they find themselves in, where typically the mother would die of hemorrhage or eclampsia or chorioamnionitis, or the baby would die of primary apnea, and now they don't die. Your generosity, everybody, over these past 20 years has helped create GPA what we are. We're a humble organization. We're an agile and collaborative NGO that has measurably improved the lives of indigenous women and children in Latin America. This is real. I think we should invite ourselves today to pause and be proud of what we've created. And I thank you from my heart for your love of this organization. I thank you from my heart for believing in the work that we're doing and caring about communities of people that you might never meet in your life. And I thank you so much for your financial support. That really makes all the difference. I just have one thing to ask today of all of you. It's very simple. Give us another 20 years. Give us another 20 years so we can walk this path together, and it is indeed a path that connects all of our humanity. So thank you so much.